And a very good morning to you, Algo fam. Today is the big day. Today is the actual day. We have John Woods, Chief Technical Officer of Algorand, coming on the show. Very excited. He will be on right at the top of the hour. Right now, better put that off the end stream button. Right now, we're just in a waiting pattern. He's going to be coming on at 9. I wanted to get things going early just to kind of talk about the show. Mr. Woods will not be talking about price. He's not able to, so we won't cover the price aspect, but everything else should be fair game. He spent some time with Cardano and Ethereum as well as Algorand, so there's lots to ask there. I've got some questions about ISO 20022 coming up, and I think I'm going to ask that first, frankly. that's going to be a big one. I'm going to get this on. Have the live stream going here in the background. Just looking here, waiting for that to pop up. For whatever reason, the live chat is not appearing on my screen, but it should be there in a minute. He will be here in 4 minutes now. Let's see, what else? What other questions do I have here? Yes, I want to ask him some of the differences between working at the various blockchains. I think that's really interesting. Like I said, of course, we're going to talk about AlgoKit and one-touch nodes. I want to ask a little bit about TVO, why that's important, why that matters, the metric, and why that's important. I want to know what metrics the foundation uses to measure success. I think that's really interesting. Tech versus marketing, how that, I want to kind of talk about that dynamic, how that works. Morning, Richard Harris. Welcome to the show. Big good morning to you and to everyone else tuning in. And let's see, what else? Yeah, I kind of want to talk about the foundation and Algorand's, what he and the foundation sees the role of Algorand, maybe 10 years from now. So we're going to look forward to a little bit. I also want to get some questions from you. So guys, leave your questions in the chat. I'm going to keep it closed on my main screen, but I'm going to keep it open on the side screen just so I don't get too distracted. I think what I'll get through my questions, and then we'll go to some of yours. So you can leave them throughout the stream, and I will dig into them. I will dig into the questions as we go. So make sure you leave your questions because that is coming up. And I'm very happy. One of the good things about the fact that this was delayed as long as it was is now my video is much better than it was when John first reached out to me. And the reason is I figured out how to use my Sony as a webcam, and it looks so much better. This is my camera that I usually take photos on, and I always wanted to use it, but actually getting videos, like just recording videos and getting it off of it, is very, very difficult. But to actually do it on here, to use it as a webcam, that works really, really well. And I'm able to take advantage of. Now, I've paid for this camera many times over through doing photography jobs, so it's not really a YouTube expense. There's no way I would spend this much on a camera just for YouTube for a channel my size, but the fact that I use this for photography and make real money doing that allows me to use it on my YouTube. So that's pretty cool. What is up, Pat Hardery? He says video and audio is all good. I appreciate that. And Patrick also coming on. So I have two regular people who are in the chat, and that is one is Pat Hardery, and the other one is Patrick. And it took me a little while to realize there were two different people, but now I get it. So very cool. Good to see you guys both in the chat. Yeah, a lot of anticipation here. We got 9 people already. And if you haven't hit the subscribe and like button already, if you wouldn't mind doing that. It looks like John is here. So you know what? I'm going to bring him on. This is the Chief Technical Officer of Algorand, John Woods.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, John, how you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Let's see. I'm going to move it to there. There we go. Half and half. Yeah. So we set this up. About a month ago. We started talking about this. You reached out to me after you appeared on BitBoy Crypto, and I wanted to ask you first off, what was it like being on BitBoy? How did that come about?
Yeah, really cool. He's a very easygoing guy, really easy to chat to. And I wasn't aware of just how big a following he had. He really has an enormous following, and I think he's been, working in the, I guess, the social circles and crypto media for a long time. Yeah, I really enjoyed chatting with him. As to how it came out, I think it was just organic enough. I think he was pals with one of the people who worked at the foundation or something like that, and we just reached out and said, "Hey, we might do a spot on Algorand if you're interested." And I think for me, the most important thing is just bringing awareness to the community and awareness to the ecosystem generally. So, I don't mind whether it's Lex Friedman or it's Joe Rogan or it's a small podcast, a big podcast. I just want to try and take every opportunity to get the message out and to engage with the community.
Yeah, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, but Silvio McCauley was on Lex Friedman a while
Yeah.
back, and that was a good episode. I kind of want to go back and listen to that one again. It was pretty cool to have him on because you don't see him popping up on a lot of, like, he's not going on YouTube shows or anything like that. So that was pretty neat.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think I've noticed the same thing. I mean, Silvio, of course, is part of a really prestigious academic cohort of individuals, and of course, he doesn't have a ton of spare time, and so when he does go on public appearances, of course, it tends to be someone quite significant. I think Lex, because I've watched that episode with Lex Friedman, and I think he's got a really interesting way of diving into subject matter with the person that he's interviewing, and so very enjoyable. Silvio is an incredible public speaker as well. I think with his answers, he thinks so deeply about each one before he kind of gives a view, and he spent so much of his career considering these things that it's you get a level of insight with his answers that you don't usually get.
I thought his speech was one of the biggest highlights for me of Decipher. Like, it really, you realize that you're listening to a real life genius. This is a guy who's like light years ahead of other people in his thinking.
Totally. I was in the front. Of course, I was speaking at Decipher briefly as well, and so he followed me. I spoke just before him, so I just come off the stage. I was right at the front of the theater, and I was listening to him. And
yeah, you set a high bar, by the way. Your speech was very good too.
I made such a silly mistake halfway through. I stumbled through my words. I was like, but I think overall it was fine. But you always pick apart your own performance when you're trying to speak publicly, and it can be tricky sometimes. But like you, I was right there. I was watching it, and I felt like it was like a wartime speech. It was like something you might hear from Winston Churchill or president of a country. He's so impassioned when he speaks, and it really is wonderful. And of course, it speaks to and I guess I can't speak for Silvio because I've only known him a relatively short time. I've only been working with him for 10 months, but it seems to me that he's very very. He has an ideological view about the world. He wants to make finance more open and more inclusive, and I guess that was the core push behind Algorand, and gave him the energy he needed to bring this and to bring his vision to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I left that speech and I was like, yeah, that's awesome. That's what I'm here for. That was good stuff. So I want to go to a very interesting topic, and I do want to dive into your biography a little bit at some point too, because you've had a pretty interesting history in the blockchain world. But before we get to that, I want to talk about ISO 20022 because this whole situation just baffles me. Right now, I, like many crypto YouTubers and a lot of other people online, were talking about, you always see these lists where there's like 6 cryptos that are ISO 20022 compliant, and Algorand is on that list. Of course, I'm primarily focused on Algorand, so I'm like, yeah, great, awesome. And then I mentioned it in one video, just kind of an offhand way. The video wasn't even about that. And someone in the comments said, hey, that's all nonsense, right? And I was like, what are you talking about? Everyone's talking about this. And they go, yeah, look at this interview that JT did with Stacey Warden. And about a half hour into the interview, she says, she basically says, well, hold on, we don't know what they're talking about when they say it's compliant with ISO 20022. So then I started digging into it. I combed through the whole ISO 20022 website. I'm like, I see no mention of crypto. As far as I can tell, this is a language standard, like a syntax standard for bank messages. I know there is a mechanism for payments within these messages. I don't know a lot about this. This is beyond my pay grade, frankly, but I did as best I could to research it. As far as I could tell, there's no way, just like Stacey says, there's no way for a crypto to be compatible with ISO 20022. You kind of mentioned that a little bit in my comments as well. I saw the chief engineer of XRP mentioned that, which is interesting because XRP is supposed to be, now that's supposed to be one that's supposed to be certified, and there's no certification whatsoever for ISO 20022. I mean, they say that flat out in their website. So
Yeah.
all of that is a nice way of setting up, like, is there any there to this at all? How should people think about this?
Yeah, totally interesting. So actually, out of interest, was the XRP engineer, was that person also kind of saying that it's nonsense in terms of
Yep.
XRP as well? Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So I think here's something we'll just chat about very briefly, more broadly, which is that I see those infographics too about every cryptocurrency from Ethereum to Monero to Cardano to whatever, and a lot of them are just total nonsense, and sometimes it can be totally really quite difficult to kind of disambiguate what's real from what's not. And
Right.
I guess it's just the world we live in. Information travels so fast, and it's propagated so trivially on things like Twitter. And if it's a
Mhm.
message that feels like it fits your narrative, or it fits what you're hoping to be the case, which is a sophisticated system that you're invested in or whatever, it's just natural to want to propagate good news about it, whether or not it's necessarily true. And so,
Mhm.
just to maybe dig into this ISO standard, of course, these ISO standards are wonderful because they,
Yeah.
outside of crypto and outside of even finance, they give standards to industries and allow us all to align on a thing and not have to do things different ways. And so this is a great in general. The ISO standards are very much kind of a messaging standard. It's a platform you
Right.
implement, financial messaging. Um, are you okay?
Sorry about that. Just had to let the dog in. I knew she'd had to come in at some point.
No worries. It happens with my kids all the time. So yeah, these are just platforms for standardizing the way we form messages, and like the quite literal answer is no. Algorand is
Mhm.
not specifically aligned to an ISO standard, and how can I say that? I can say that because if you look at the components within the stack, so that's consensus, the ledger rules, and the network stack. If you look at the protocol layered over that, if you look at the AVM, which is executing the smart contracts, none of those components have been coded to be compliant against an ISO 2022 standard or whatever. And
Mhm.
so, but as I said on Twitter, it's not compliant. As in, like, there's nothing prohibiting Algorand from being compliant. And in fact, it wouldn't really make sense, to my mind as an architect, to implement that kind of stuff at the protocol layer. You wouldn't necessarily have those kind of
Mhm.
messages floating around at the protocol layer unless your blockchain was dedicated to those types of messages. And instead, what makes much more sense is when you're communicating or implementing smart contracts, that's at the level, the application layer is where you implement adherence
Mhm.
to a specification like that. So, you and I might make an enterprise grade application. We might have a DeFi application, and we might say that we're integrating against some backend somewhere, and we want to be able for our smart contracts to be able to generate those kind of messages. So we'd have a backend that is compliant, that does generate those messages of that format, and dispatches them out to a Web2 API, and we can use our smart contracts to build those messages and other things. But again, not at the protocol level. And I think just more broadly, outside of things which are quite sophisticated like ISO standardization, you
Mhm.
see it even in terms of transactions per second or TVL or other things that are much less technical. And they're still, in some cases, these infographics are wrong. So yeah, a recommendation for people just to kind of double check on things before you just assume it's correct, even if it does sound like it's going to be a good thing for you.
Yeah, in that case, it was a pretty hard thing to double check, because it's all over the place, and I haven't seen anything. I've seen a couple other videos since I created mine, but mine really blew up. That's still probably I think it's like third or fourth for the most views on my channel, and I got like half the comments were actually I'd say they divided into three. A third of the comments were like, "Wow, I didn't know that." A third of the comments were like, "Yeah, I've been saying this all along. Finally, someone made a video." And then another third of the comments were like, "What's wrong with you? You're wrong." And I had people going to war with me on Twitter, and they were saying, and they'd point to some like Yahoo Finance article. No, see, it says it right in the Yahoo Finance article. I'm like, yeah, that's just an aggregate of all the other information that's out there.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And
So,
it's an easy mistake to make. But
mhm,
yeah, there's nothing precluding Algorand because it's Turing complete, because you can effectively express any kind of logic within the smart contracts, because the smart
mhm,
contracts are Turing complete. There's nothing to stop you adhering to any of those specifications. So Algorand is, like I like to say, not compliant. Could be
mhm,
compliant, but you have to go and implement that at the application layer yourself, and
right.
it's not something that we're going to be doing at the protocol layer, to my knowledge.
Mm. And is that Turing complete what allows that to do that? Is it a matter of like any blockchain with a smart contract layer could at the DApp level could actually be compliant with this messaging standard?
Right, exactly. And Turing completeness is, of course, goes back to Alan Turing and his
Hmm.
famous Turing test about how
Yep.
you can, define the semantic capability of a language. What I really am trying to say when I say that is that you can kind of do anything in an Algorand smart contract that you can do in a normal computer application on your iPhone or your
Hmm.
MacBook or your Windows computer. And so it's completely open. The only limitations in an Algorand
Hmm.
context that you don't have, say, on your MacBook or your Windows PC is that when you're running a smart contract on Algorand and Ethereum and Cardano and all the other programmable blockchains, you have a limited amount of runtime in terms of CPU units or CPU cycles, and you have a
Hmm.
limited amount of memory. So you can only make so many variables and make so many objects in your application. You can't use memory. You can't use 30 gigs of memory for your smart contract. And so
Gotcha.
those two things are limitations that I think technically make it, I mean, not Turing complete because a Turing machine isn't supposed to have those limitations technically. But ultimately, we speak about it being Turing complete because the language itself, PyTeal, is able to basically express anything you can express in C or Java or any of the other major
Hmm.
programming languages.
I think this is interesting because I think ISO 20022 has been somewhat conflated with cross-border payments. And maybe you can kind of talk about the relation or lack of relation between the two, or how those are connected, and how Algorand would fit into a cross-border payments scenario.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, I'm not an expert in any capacity on that ISO standard, but I
Sure.
have spent time working in central banks. And so, as an example, a similar analog for those ISO messages are like Swift messages. And so I know a fair
Mhm.
bit about Swift messages because I've implemented a number of systems with them in a central bank context. And so,
Mhm.
whether you're paying a coupon on a bond, or you're paying a redemption on a share, or you're paying a security, or you're settling something. There's different Swift standards that you would use that define how that message is propagated across the financial networks. They have codes like MT201, MT202, this kind of thing. But
Mhm.
effectively, if you look inside a Swift message, it's just text. It is just
Mhm.
English text, and it defines a certain number of parameters, and those parameters then allow us to express a financial transaction. And so
Mhm.
with Algorand, you can do the exact same thing. You can write your smart contracts in a way that they generate transactions that they call their smart contracts. Um,
Mhm.
and of course, you can link it up to whatever backend that you want to link it up to. So, there's nothing, Algorand's an excellent candidate, actually, given its speed, given its resiliency. What I mean by that is that, how much uptime it has. Given its security, it's an excellent candidate for a cross-borders payment solution. And we've seen this in many
Mhm.
contexts. I think it's used quite a lot in LATAM, in Latin America, South America. It's used in many cases to do cross-border payments. I think another example of this is Hesab Pay in Afghanistan. So in Afghanistan, the currency is the Afghani, and so AGN is the local currency there. But sometimes for certain groups of people, particularly women in certain regions there, they don't have access to high quality banking or safe banking the way we might in certain parts of the world, like Europe or the US. And so these guys behind HesabPay have basically created a digital version of the Afghani, and they've done so in a way that it's integrated in so many of the different stores that are out there. And so there's like 10,000 places in Afghanistan that you can go and you can spend this digital Afghani as if it was local currency. But what's
Nice.
wonderful about this is that it's secure, it's discreet, it's
Mhm.
owned, it's self-sovereign to the individual that's owning it, and it's really empowered women who would normally maybe in that region not have access to their own self-sovereign wealth, be able to kind of, I guess, enjoy a more secure banking system. And so,
Mhm.
look at any of these sophisticated systems that have integration at the level I just described. Whether it's for global remittance, as in sending money from country to country, or indeed whether it's for something that's like a local need on the ground, that's a high impact application like Hasab Pay, which really helps actual human beings that are suffering. Most of the time, it's a combination of blockchain for some component and also some type of backend. So with Hasab Pay, there tends to be a Web2 component, some kind of server that's running, some kind of backend processes that need to be there to support the onboarding of the local currency onto the digital version, to support the processing of transactions between
Mhm.
individuals on the back end, the UI, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, what Algorand is great at is being that trusted, diamond tether to the blockchain. This way we can ensure that we don't have double spends and the money is safe and that the ownership of the funds is cryptographically secure. And so, yeah, I think Algorand is, as blockchains go, and my experience professionally has been across Ethereum, Cardano, and of course Algorand. It is the closest to perfect that I've worked with in terms of delivering these kind of enterprise solutions, because it has these characteristics, whether it's the speed, the resiliency, the security, or even just how well it scales horizontally with users and accounts, that it allows and empowers enterprise-grade solutions at a national and international level. And I think if you try to do that on other programmable blockchains, whether it's Cardano, Ethereum, or others, you tend to run into friction at some point along the journey because it just doesn't maybe scale as well as something like Algorand currently.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because Algorand is, I always call it the adult in the crypto room. You know, it does all the like functionality stuff that you would want a blockchain to do. And yet it seems to, Algorand has always seemed to have trouble generating the same excitement as some of the other cryptos. You know, it just, the whole Pepe scenario recently just kind of illustrated that in a very short time frame. Like,
Yeah.
and I know this is maybe going out. I know you're the CTO, so this is maybe going outside your wheelhouse a little bit. But how do you guys, you know, just as the foundation as a whole, how do you look at the difference between and the relation between doing all that important back end stuff and then generating the excitement that a crypto needs, frankly, to continue and to survive?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. And you know, I think generally meme coins are a little bit silly. I don't have any myself. Maybe it's the bitterness because I never made much money with them whenever everyone else seemed to. Maybe that's why I'm so twisted and bitter about it. But I just never got into it. You know, my first kind of foray into crypto was Bitcoin, of course, and then in 2014, 2015, I started using Monero and Ethereum a lot, and they were the two serious projects that I cared about. And both of them, I think, are very not memey. You know, they're very, you know, Ethereum back then, and certainly Monero is, you know, they take themselves quite seriously. And so there was always this kind of like ideology of like, oh, these projects are serious, they're going to change the world. And so I never got into the Dogecoins or any of that stuff when I was at that stage. And so similarly, just with Pepe as an example, I think the meme is funny from a personal point of view, but of course it's a bit silly, and people will get hurt with it a little bit because when you have rallies where, you know, the price of Pepe goes, you know, 200% up. I don't know exactly what percentage it moved, but like I've seen spikes of certainly 99% kind of thing. Like in a day or two or a week or whatever, like someone's going to end up buying high and then end up getting hurt. So that's the danger with those things. But you know, my personal views on the view of the foundation, and of course I'm the CTO. I'm not on the marketing side, but my personal view is all use of the blockchain tends to be pretty good. We want it to be used. I try not to be judgmental about how it's being used once it's you know once it's reasonable, as in that it's not illegal. And I think, you know, it's totally fine. And it, you know, although Pepe will be seen by many, including myself, as a bit silly, it just generates transactions. It generates noise. It generates excitement. It generates silly memes, and people get excited and they play with it. And ultimately, if that means that maybe, you know, a couple of thousand new people came to Algorand, experienced, you know, it's kind of, I don't say it's power, but it's the user experience on Algorand, the characteristics that it has, the speed of it. Maybe they're going to stay. You know, maybe they'll come for the silliness, but end up staying and taking it more seriously and learning about it. And so. I'm kind of quite liberal about the use of it. I think it's permissionless chain and let people at it. In terms of, you know, balancing being a grown up all the time with being a bit more fun, I think it's tricky. I think really Charles does a very good job on Cardano, because Cardano also takes itself quite seriously, right? It's got an academic background with Charles. Charles takes academic research very seriously. There's an entire research team. Cardano.
His appearance on Lex Friedman was also well worth listening to. I think it was like 5.5 hours, and it was just fire after fire. Like, it was just great.
Yeah, totally. And I think he does a very good job of walking the line. This is my personal view, but walking the line between making it exciting, but also making it quite structured and quite like, hey, we're grown-ups and we've done proper research. And so if you look at the technology stack in Cardano, you'll see that it's based on formal methods and executable specifications, and they start with peer-reviewed research and they get right down to code. And so that's very serious. But Charles still manages to kind of get out there and get the message out and build a culture and a community around it. And so with the rest of the executive team, again, who at the Algorand Foundation, we've kind of had a relatively new executive team, predominantly, right? Stacey's only there, I guess, for a year and a bit or whatever. I've only been there 10 months. Min, who's our global head of ecosystem growth, so she's all about promoting the ecosystem. She's only been there a few months. Jess is our CMO, again, only 3 or 4 months. So these folks are kind of just getting into their stride. They're not all there 5 years, 10 years. Okay, so
sure.
So I do think we have a great team that we've put together. I think, like, when the 6 of us sit in a room and we chat, I think we have all these wonderful ideas, and we're building really strong teams around us to deliver. And I think we have delivered. If you look at there's much more excitement and much more organic feel about how we bring the message of Algorand to the market. Whether it's, if you look at what happened with AlgoKit recently, so we launched AlgoKit, which is everything you need to build apps in Algorand. It's like a one-stop shop. It's a box. It's got everything inside this box. Helps you build apps in Algo. That was met with terrific response from the developer community. Everyone knew about it. Everyone was talking about it, and that's all you can ask. From your marketing team. And so they did a great job getting that to market like a product, rather than just having it be in the news for one day and then everyone forgets about it. And so I think that was a terrific example of the team coming together to kind of really promote something that we've done together. And so you'll see that we've got lots of other strategies for the rest of the year and for next year, both AlgoKit V2. So we're going to kind of drop this killer version 2 of Algorand at the end of the year. It's going to have lots of cool features, or with the many other initiatives that we have. And I won't go into them because I can't speak to them well, because they're not necessarily my initiatives. But what you will see is the team coming together to try to really deliver impact. And I'm hoping between the 6 of us working together, we can kind of capture some of that, get on that really good line, which is keeping the community excited, but doing so in a way that is delivering real substance and not just talking rubbish.
For sure. So I want to go back a little bit to your biography. Now, you had worked with Ethereum and Cardano before Algorand. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you talk about the difference between Algorand and Cardano and Ethereum as far as, like, behind the scenes, what it's like to be at each of those organizations, and maybe the difference how working at Algorand compares to working at these other places? Because I think that's an insight a lot of us probably don't really get on a regular basis.
Yeah, sure. So when I say I worked on Ethereum, I worked at Consensus, and Consensus is probably the biggest studio that's built around Ethereum, and it's owned by Joseph Lubin, who's one of the co-founders of Ethereum, alongside Charles Hoskinson and also Vitalik Buterin and others. And so it was like working for Ethereum Inc. to a degree. And then, of course, I worked at IOHK, which was the Cardano Inc., if you want to call it that. And now I'm at the Algorand Foundation, which, of course, is not on the protocol engineering side, but is on the ecosystem development and adoption side. I think the commonality with all 3 of these places that I worked was there's an incredible passion about what's being built, whether it's from the CEOs like Stacey and Charles, or whether it's from just a junior engineer who's just starting their career. Everyone is very much plugged in, high energy, very excited about what we're actually delivering, even during times that are, during bear markets when it's easy to get a bit bummed out, or people, are feeling like, that things are a bit slower. Even in those times, and I've worked, by the way, in bear markets in Consensus. Certainly, that I worked there when Ethereum dropped from just under $1,000 down to like $80 or whatever that drop was in 2017 or whatever, or 2018. And so there tended to be not as much excitement in the air with the general public, but when you're in those organizations, there was still a lot of electricity and a lot of excitement. I think as well, they tended to be wonderful places to learn. Sometimes I've worked in regular organizations too, Ericsson, Citibank, Informatica, another place I worked, a big American privately owned company. And those companies, whilst interesting and whilst certainly noteworthy, don't have the same culture around learning and around collaboration. I feel like one thing in Web3 companies, if I can call it that, is that you're surrounded by people who want to help you learn. And whether that was in the early days when I was learning about the applied cryptography, and I would have wonderful people who were much older than me, much busier than me, would sit down and spend hours with me explaining the mathematics and other things behind these concepts, so I really understood it. All the way to what I try to do, which is when I'm working as an architect in Cardano or on Ethereum, I'd be working very closely with the junior engineers and trying to make sure that they actually developed a fundamental understanding of things. And so very collaborative, very encouraging, very nurturing environments to work in generally.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. I think it's been good. I'm not saying, by the way, there wasn't days when people lost their patience or when someone shouted or whatever. It wasn't utopia, but it was definitely the most exciting kind of environment I've ever worked in. And quite coolly, in a way, you can say you're working in open source professionally in a way, right? Because although, I know it's a little bit different to kind of necessarily working on Linux or something like that, but you are actually working on open source software and bringing the state of the art forward. In terms of those technologies and how they interact, of course, Ethereum and Algorand are quite similar in the sense that they have a virtual machine inside, the EVM and the AVM. So they have this kind of idea of a virtual CPU that you program smart contracts for. When you write your contract, whether it's in Solidity for Ethereum or it's in PyTeal at the moment for Algorand, you compile it down to bytecode or machine code, ones and zeros for those virtual CPUs. Both Ethereum and Algorand are both account-based models, so they're not UTXO-based. You don't have these like little outputs that represent coins you can spend. Instead, you have this kind of account structure where accounts hold balances and balances move between accounts. And this is very, very important because Cardano uses, unlike Ethereum and Algorand, doesn't have a virtual machine at its heart for execution of the contracts. Instead, it has an interpreter called Plutus, which is a bit like the Python interpreter. I mean, this is not exact, but just to give people a feel for it. And rather than say compile an app for your MacBook and you run it natively in machine code, which is really what Algorand and Ethereum kind of do. In Cardano, you write a script, and that script, like a Python script, is interpreted by the Plutus interpreter or runtime. And so just like when you write a Python script on your computer, it doesn't compile down to ones and zeros and get executed by the CPU directly. It runs in the Python interpreter. And so so that's kind of quite a technical difference. But ultimately, when you're building applications then on Cardano, you have to think in a slightly different way. You have to think in terms of architecture in an EUTXO model or an extended on-spent transaction output model. And so you just got to think of it like different building blocks. If one is Lego, the other one's Play-Doh, you just got to kind of work with the substance that you have in order to build the types of things that you need. And so when you're building an automated market maker on a VM account-based platform like Algorand or Ethereum, it's totally different how you'd approach that in a UTXO interpreted environment like Cardano. But still, that said, I think, look, there's across all of these platforms, there's different approaches to consensus. There's different approaches to data propagation and connectivity. There's different approaches to how the ledger is constructed and how the data structures within the ledger look. But ultimately, I think you have to look at these three projects as three state-of-the-art, incredible attempts to move us to a place that is a self-sovereign, decentralized digital payment system. And I think they're all incredibly cool in their own way.
So I want to ask a little bit of a nerdy question here, but so Algorand is coded in PyTeal. That's a Python library, if I'm not mistaken. Python is probably the only language I've actually able to do some coding in. It's a lot of fun. I think it's a pretty accessible language compared to others.
Sure.
Do you think that's a benefit for Algorand, even outside of the Algo kit that is now going to simplify this process even further? But do you think being in Python versus Solidity, which is kind of a new language for smart contracts, is that a big plus for Algorand in terms of developers?
So I think it will be where we take Algo 52. I think we're going to get to an even easier place. And so maybe I'll just kind of break it down. You said there about PyTeal, and so with any computer, whether it's, again, your MacBook or your iPhone, or indeed the Ethereum virtual machine, the computer at the heart of Ethereum, or the computer at the heart of Algorand, the Algorand virtual machine, you got to think of these things roughly as equivalent. They're basically computers that can execute instructions, and you've got to tell them how to execute. Tell them rather what instructions to execute. And so, on a Mac we use Swift to write those instructions. It's a very simple programming language. On Ethereum, you use Solidity, which is a bit like JavaScript. But all of these CPUs, whether it's Apple Silicon on your Mac, whether it's Intel CPU inside your Windows PC, or whether it's the EVM or AVM, these are like central processing units, and they all have a very low level language. When I say low level, I mean very terse, not very human readable language,
Right.
called assembly. And
Mhm.
so we have for Apple Silicon, you've got ARM assembly. For Intel, you've got x86 assembly, and then for the AVM and EVM, you have effectively for the AVM, certainly you've got Teal. And so Teal is kind of like the assembly language for Algorand. And so PyTeal was a thing that the engineering team did where they said, well, like you can write code in assembly, and people do write code, ARM assembly and Intel assembly for certain very low level things, but it
Yeah.
tends to be when you want to highly optimize something that's very specific. So as you said, the average developer is not using assembly on a day-to-day basis. And so we really needed to kind of lift that up away from that kind of low level stuff and get people writing in a language that was expressive and easy to articulate your business logic. And so PyTeal is where we took the syntax of Python. So the structure of Python, how you
Mhm.
word Python, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and wrapped it around Teal so that you were kind of telling the computer what to do, but doing it in a Python-y way. AlgoKit builds on that again. And what AlgoKit does is says, well, you do a lot of stuff as a developer. One does a lot of stuff when you're building, testing, and deploying. And the kind of things you do is, set up your folder structures, like set up your directory structure for all your apps, for your app, write out the source code files. You want to see the source code syntax highlighted so that you can see the colors of the various keywords. When you're building, you want to be able to test it locally, and you want to be able to do that quick. When you deploy, you want to be able to deploy to testnet very simply and make sure that it's running. And when you're debugging, when you have a problem because you didn't write the perfect code the first time, you want to be able to step through your code line by line and figure out where the problem is. And so what
Right.
AlgoKit's a framework to help with all that stuff. It brings you on the full development journey from an idea right the way to mainnet. Still, though, we're using PyTeal. So the language you express yourself with in Algorand, in AlgoKit, when
Mhm.
you're doing this build, test, and deploy journey is still PyTeal. And
Mhm.
so we're looking at ways that we can make other languages more available. And ultimately, AlgoKit v2 is going to a place where the usability is just getting better and better. And so with AlgoKit v1 that we launched, a month and a bit ago, the main goal was to make rudimentary tasks that people go through when they're starting
Mhm.
their first project, whether it's a template as a safe starting point, or whether it's
Mhm.
the basics of like, how the hell do I get this code to just run? We
Right.
made that easy. And basically what we did was we looked at how Truffle does it on Ethereum, or Hardhat, or these other kind of development tool suites. And we tried to
Mhm.
emulate some of that stuff for Algorand because Algorand didn't have that level of ease for developers. Now V2 is like AlgoKit V1 on steroids. So it's going to be helping with the entire experience, okay, the entire development experience, including the web front ends, the whole lot. And so it's going to make linguistics even easier. It's going to make the entire development user experience just seamless. And so we're going to have a big drop at the end of the year, of course, but we'll be
Mhm.
incrementing V1 on the way. So we're going to have V1.1, V1.2 during the course of this year, and then we'll drop version 2.0, which is going to be killer towards the end of the year. But again, without getting into specifics, because I want it to be exciting for people when they get there,
Mhm.
it's going to be making it so easy that your grandmother could write Algorand apps. That's the goal.
Nice. So maybe I'll be able to too then.
Come on, no worries.
So I want to ask you with as a foundation as a whole, like what metrics do you guys use to measure success? What, and then if is there one metric that is kind of key above all else? But also, I just want to know what those metrics are.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons, and of course, I can't really speak for the other kind of executives within the team because I'm not as familiar with what they're looking at. But and again, like I mentioned, the executive team is kind of relatively newly formed together.
Right.
A number of the members are only there kind of a couple of months, and so they're still getting their strategies in order. I would say, but
Hmm.
whether it's on the technology side, I think it's a lot easier because I can say, well, how many downloads of AlgoKit have I had? How many people have hit the developer portal? How many relays have we got out there? How many participation nodes are out there? What's the decentralization governance or metrics like? How many algos being staked? By who? That kind of stuff. It's a lot more hard, tangible stuff that I can it's very easy for me to slice it up. And to be honest, I was blown away by some of the metrics that we've had on AlgoKit. We've had tens of thousands of downloads.
Oh wow.
And yeah, I was like, I wasn't, I think it was like something like 40 or 50,000 downloads in the first couple of weeks. And it's like, I didn't even think we had 50,000 people who were developing actively, So,
Right.
so I mean, it's a good metric.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we'll see how it goes, because obviously people get excited at the start, and then things tend to tail off a little bit. On the ecosystem and adoption side, I wouldn't want to speak for other people, but I know that they care about, like, of course, number of transactions, which is a proxy for how much people are using it. Active wallets, wallets opened, new wallets, that kind of stuff. What is an active wallet? A wallet that's moving funds or moving NFTs, that's actively engaging on a regular basis rather than just holding. But also looking at many of the businesses in Algorand, I think is important. So it's like, well, you look at, say, the very great Algorand.io. It's something I think Powell does a fantastic job. He's very popular within the community and runs a great service there where he hosts nodes, and he'll run an Algorand node for you, or his service will run an Algorand node for you. So you got to look at how many customers, how are they doing? How are the projects that are trying to build businesses within the ecosystem doing? Whether it's the NFT, marketplaces, like Rand Gallery or like Exa as just an example of two, or whether it's the infrastructural players like Algonode. I think we got to look at those and make sure that we factor in how they're experiencing things. So I guess in summary, we're taking quite a quantitative approach to things now, and so there's more maturity coming in terms of how we assess our success and how we assess whether or not we're heading in the right way. I don't think it's perfect yet, but these are some of the types of things that we will be looking at. And now that we have a really well structured management team, and we're starting to really build out or extend the already pretty great team that was working at the foundation anyway, I think you're going to see a lot more structure in terms of that kind of stuff.
And when the foundation looks out 5-10 years, what does success look like in 5-10 years? What do you guys hope for the future?
Yeah, well, certainly I'll speak on the tech front, because that's where I can speak more confidently. I wouldn't say 10, because 10 years is like in crypto time. That's like
it's eternity in crypto. Yeah.
Will Bitcoin even be here in 10 years? Who knows? Hopefully, we're all still alive.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit of a crazy world at the moment, but certainly in 5 years, let me speak to that. So in 5 years, I would like to be in a position where I could look back and say that we got Algorand, the developer tool suite for Algorand, to a place where it was as easy or easier than the best quality developer experience on Ethereum. I think you got to hold yourself to the highest standard. I think many chains do it well. I think Near has a good developer experience. There's others who have good developer experiences. I think we have to get to a place where we are up there with the best of the best, and it's as fun as developing an iPhone app or an Android app. Super simple, super great, and by that we just have this like gravity well where people want to build on the chain. I think it's critically important that we keep organically growing in TVL. I mean, it's not about it's not a vanity metric, but rather that the chain is accruing or accreting users, it's accreting value. And I think that's important that organically happens. And although it's not technically a CTO-y thing or a technology thing, I think it's important that we are able to look back and see that growth. And then finally, I would say that in terms of decentralization and the core technology, and again, I'm not responsible directly for this, although I do love working on the protocol. I miss working on the protocol. When I was on Cardano, I was working on the protocol on a day-to-day basis. It's fun to work on the protocol directly, but our colleagues at the Inc. are doing a fantastic job. And I think my discussions with those guys, and we speak on a regular basis to make sure that we're all pushing in the same direction, or certainly are aligned on the technical strategy for the protocol. It's a push towards decentralization even further. It's a push towards a place where it's easy for the end user to run a node. I mean, I've got this, this one-click node thing. By the way, let me just tell you, on this one-click node, I think it's taken a life of its own. When I was interviewing, was trying to set up a node. It was a pain in the ass. And so, interviewing for my job 10 months ago, I was trying to play with the tech, and I couldn't get the node up as easy as I wanted. And I was like, it's got to be this. It's got to be easier than this. So when I joined, I was like, being trained by all the DevRel guys, getting bootstrapped on all the tech, and it turned out no, it's just not that easy. And so what I wanted to be is that this one-click node idea I had was just simply, it should be like a one-liner. It should be like a copy paste, a curl command, a brew install, an apt get. It should be something very simple that you just hit one thing and it brings the node up, and it's clean, it's encapsulated. And so this one-click node thing that we're doing, in its very first release, it's probably just going to be bring up a relay or bring up a participation node. It's not going to be all singing, all dancing, GUI, but it's going to be, you can get the node up and down in a very simple way. But where it needs to get to is that it is, when you're running a participation node or a consensus node, I like to call it, you have to basically manage your staking keys. You have to, or participation keys is what they're technically called, of course. You have to basically create your participation keys, sign them with your payment keys, if I can call them that, install them on the participation node or the consensus node, bring that node up, make sure it's running, renew the keys. There's a lot of process there that people have to go through if they want to be actively staking their Algorand. And so I don't think it can be like generating keys in the command line and signing them manually. That doesn't work. Not if we want like thousands of people part of this, right? Yeah, fine if we want 100 people part of it, 200 people, whatever. So we have to get it to a place, because people won't read the docs. They're not going to watch the videos. They have to just go to the website, click, I want to run a node. They run the node, they run a command, and it's working. And so that's where we need to get it. And I think if we, with the things that are on the Inks roadmap, and I won't spoil it because I think some of it's very exciting around decentralization, it's stuff like make archival nodes much easier to run, make relays smaller, more efficient, look at the data propagation strategy so that we maybe can do more peer-to-peer networking rather than always going through relays, that kind of stuff. With their push on that technology front, plus me pushing on the developer tools and the general ease of use, the user experience piece, I would like to think we'd look back in 5 years' time and go, well, the reason we have 5,000 nodes running for consensus and the reason we're this decentralized is because of the work that we did.
When speaking of the one-touch nodes, when are you expecting, like, kind of the first version? When are you expecting the fancy GUI version that you mentioned?
Yes, sure. So I mean, I said Q2 this year for the for the nodes. I mean, when I kind of, before I say something online, I always think it's important. And in my career, by the way, I've worked for many CEOs and stuff that sometimes, particularly over Cardano, sometimes Charles would say something that would put the rest of the engineering team under a little bit of pressure because it wasn't fully ready.
Right.
And so, but sometimes you do have to lock it in. You have to go. You have to kind of say, you got to commit to something, and put the engineering under a little bit of pressure in order to deliver. So, so yeah, we should be comfortably able to release the first one in Q2 before Q2 is over. I would like to think towards the end of this month, early next month. But then, yeah, for the kind of richer experience where participation keys are managed for you and that kind of stuff, I would like to think before 2024, so before the end of the year. But again, this is another thing people don't really kind of realize is that the engineering teams, both at the Inc. and certainly at the Foundation, because we're not an engineering organization truly in the sense that we're on the ecosystem side, are really tiny. We have relatively small teams. I mean, we've got, single-digit number of people working on technical stuff on a day-to-day basis at the Foundation. And so, like, it just does take a bit of time. I would love to have that team be much bigger, but we're trying to stay lean and not hire people, not overhire and that kind of stuff. And the same with the Inc., although they have their own strategy, their own process. I know that, of course, if we had double the number of people, we get this stuff done a lot faster, but it's just hard to keep lean teams and also deliver on as many initiatives as we're trying to deliver on,
No, it's understandable for sure. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, but do you got time for a couple community questions?
Yeah, sure.
Let's see what we got here. I'm just going to go back through. Let's see. So Pat Hardery asked, do you see algo adoption, mass usage happening sooner in countries outside of the USA, like South America, et cetera? I kind of spoke to that a little bit, but maybe you can touch on that a little more.
Yeah, I think, and this is my personal view rather than like a professional view, but like, I think if you look at how great it is to use regular banking in Europe and the US, I obviously I don't have a US bank, but like when I look at things like Cash App and other things over there, it's quite easy to send money between people. Certainly in Europe, you have products like Revolut, it's an app on your phone. It can do everything from invest retirements for you to savings vaults. You can send money between your friends. It's low. The FX rates are basically zero on it, no matter what country you're in. And so I think in financially developed countries, you have maybe not as much push to kind of move away from these very comfortable things like Apple Pay and Google Pay and whatever. And I think in countries that maybe don't enjoy that because they're either not part of the magic circle where those kind of technologies are available, or because they have more corrupt banking systems, or because they have unreliable banking systems, or whatever, or they have, in many cases, the killer one is massive inflation, as I've seen in many countries. the currency is devaluing on a day-to-day basis, and so you can't, your savings are literally being eradicated by inflation. I think in those places there is a more innate need for technologies like Algorand in the shorter term. So I do think we'll see, and we are seeing, I think, more adoption in those kind of places, LATAM, certain parts of the Middle East, Asia, not Asia, but India, kind of places like that, where maybe the infrastructure is not as good as it might be in the US. And so we're seeing more adoption there. I think, though, generally, people will realize at some point that the other virtues of what Web3 does, the self-sovereignty, the decentralization, the fact that you're no longer subject to quantitative easing and global fiscal policies, and the interest rates that the Fed will pull up or down or whatever and affect banks, and those types of things, that self-sovereignty, that reliance on self, that predictability of the emission of coins and other things. I think that even in developed countries where they have this excellent financial system, we'll still see further adoption in those places due to those characteristics.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we're in the first world, we have pretty reliable infrastructure for the most part. And when I hear people attack crypto, a lot of times they think, yeah, but you're thinking from our perspective. There's other places where this is absolutely crucial for some of these countries. Some of these places, you just simply don't have access to banks. The banks have a monopoly, and they can just jack up rates, and they can just cut off your funds. We're seeing that even in some first world countries, where if you say the wrong political thing, that you can be debanked pretty quickly. And I think that is, every time that happens, it's kind of making the use case for crypto a little stronger.
And I'll tell you, between you and I, from a personal point of view, the things that you've just said, I absolutely agree. And actually, it's my motivator. Like, one of the things that motivates me about working on this technology, in the face many times when I get criticism, is that I do absolutely feel that we are emancipating people and empowering people, certainly in a financial context, and that is it's valuable and important work.
Totally, absolutely. I just think about holding crypto. If you were like living in Venezuela, it's such a massive hedge against just like crazy and out of control inflation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's see what else we got. Let's see. I got one from Patrick, and he says, "How do you think Algorand wallets can be made more simple so the public, especially for developing countries, can use them?" He says, i.e., the use of QR codes, ease of getting Algorand for gas fees, etc.
Yeah, sure. It's an excellent point. And so, I've mentioned this before to folks that, and of course, many people will already be aware of this, but those 24 words that you write down when you open a crypto wallet on any platform, Para or Ledger or whatever, they're really an English word representation of a private key. And that private key, what is that? Fundamentally, it's actually a large decimal number between 0 and 2 to the power of 256. And so a private key in elliptic curve cryptography, which we use in all of these cryptocurrencies, is this big decimal number. And so there's, from an information theory point of view, if you look at how can I represent information, the entropy or the unpredictability of this decimal number means that it cannot be represented in any shorter a way than 256 ones and zeros. That's just an information theory reality. And so the question then becomes, because if we're not happy with, the question that Patrick asked is really, how do we make it easier with this key thing, with the public keys, with the QR codes, all that stuff? It's not a great user experience for people who aren't techie. And so the question then becomes, how do we make it easy for the average person to hold something that's very, very important? And if they lose it, they lose access to their funds or their pension or their savings. And what is the thing? Well, it's a large decimal number. How do we do that? And so there are only so many ways you can cut this, right? So I think the 24 words or 24 emojis and that kind of thing is reasonable. I don't think it's very good. Of course, you'll see people pushing things like custodial wallets, but the problem there is if Coinbase are holding your funds, or Binance, or Fidelity, or whatever, you aren't trusting that counterpart. So you've given up not the decentralization, but you've certainly given up the self-sovereignty, and that's one of the kind of cornerstones of why we're doing this thing. And so I don't know if I personally would ever want to give up that self-sovereignty to an institution like that. And then you've got these kind of like in the middle solutions, which are kind of hybrid approaches, things like MPC, these multi-party computation and other things. So we're starting to see wallets emerge that are much more social. And I think that's probably where we end up going. And what do I mean by that? It's like, well, I have an account, it's got 100 algo. Hey, I get a message popping up saying, hey, you've got a relatively significant amount of funds now. You should think about securing your key. Bring your phone near your mom, your wife, your dad, or your brother, or whatever, and we'll be able to give a part of the key, a part of your identity to them, and they can help you restore. And we see this even with, if you look at advanced data protection with Apple, when you turn on the 2FA and you turn on, the advanced protection with Apple, you can then choose to kind of nominate someone to recover your account, whether it's your mom or your brother or your friend or whatever. And so this, I think, is probably where we're going to end up going. But ultimately, I agree.
So too.
We need to make it easier.
Yeah.
It's got to be a thing that the user experience feels good. And I think the answer is QR codes.
Well, that's kind of what I've been saying. That's what I've been saying about crypto and crypto adoption, is that a lot of this stuff has to be, when people are excited about using their iPhone, no one is like, oh my gosh, this flash memory technology is just amazing. They're just like, cool. What's the device and what can I do with it? And
Right.
I think at some point, crypto is going to have to appeal to non-crypto people. And I think that has to do with the applications that are going to be on top of it and being so interesting to people that they don't even necessarily care about blockchain technology. And we're seeing some of that. Visa has its own private blockchain. A lot of these major retail stores are using blockchain inventory systems. So like the technology is being used. And I think more of that as it continues will be kind of where crypto really becomes a mainstay of the populace.
Totally. You know what? Just like one small thing that kind of resonates with me. When you log into a website, whether any like Costco, or you log into Tesco, or you log into any store, or your golf club, doesn't matter. When you log in and you see some kind of points associated with you or some kind of balance, that is HTML that's been served by a web server by the golf club, the shop, the store, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That is not yours. You don't have ownership of those
Right.
points or those achievements or whatever. And so that's the key value proposition. It's that number on the screen is actually sitting in a wallet that you control. And when people realize that, and it's across many contexts, from whether or not I have my 10th coffee is free, all the way to hey, these are payments that are come from UNESCO or something, or it's not UNESCO, like some government organization, FEMA, because I've been in disaster relief and I need support quickly. And so whether it's something very trivial or something like it's very high impact, very serious, has a very serious consequence for humanity, what people are going to realize in this whole rainbow of contexts is that blockchain gives the thing to you and you control it, and that is a very important takeaway. And I think when more people realize that, they'll see the value of that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a great place to cap things off. But John, really appreciate you coming on the show. I think we had a good conversation today, and hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime.
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity to help me get the message out. I really appreciate speaking to you and your viewers. And absolutely, let's do it again.
Awesome, cool. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. It was really cool having John Woods on. And make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. You can get this hat down below. So if you guys want to do that, but big shout out to John Woods for coming on the show. I think we had a lot of fun today. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I know I couldn't ask all the questions. I did want to be respectful of his time. And it was good. And that was a lot of fun. So be sure to tune in. You can see my live streams every Sunday. I'm going to I want to do an Algorand XGov one coming up soon. Maybe this Sunday I'll have a couple of the XGov people on the regular live stream. But, again, thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. And as always, stay safe out there. Not your keys, not your crypto. Get your stuff off exchanges. John's telling you, man, got to get your stuff off the exchanges. So, that's it. Stay safe. I'm Frugal BC, and I will see you in the future.